On this exciting episode, a doctor's pristine reputation is on the line. An ex-flame turned business advisor winds up dead, and Sam Drucker is running a con game. Oh, and did I mention the whole your uncle sent you money from Switzerland, but actually he's been dead in a planter box this whole time thing? Yep, it's that old chestnut. It's Perry Mason, Season 5, Episode 7, The Case of the Pathetic Patient. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy. My purpose, pretty simple, provide an audio companion to every episode of television's greatest legal drama, Perry Mason. Each episode, we give you a summary of the plot. We even compare plots with the Earl Stanley Gardner novel if the episode was an adaptation. We give you a little trivia, reveal the episode's theme, then revel in a Perry proverb, that's a pearl of wisdom from the man himself, before we head to the water cooler where, just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can discuss the ins and outs of our favorite legal cruise adventures. But first, say it with me, to the law library! Each episode in the law library, we examine legal conundrums from Perry's cases in order to find hidden precedents for future cases. The case of the pathetic patient involves medical malpractice claims.
Doc, if you got enough money to build a brand new clinic, I guess you got enough to pay me. There's a thing called malpractice, and that's what I'm going to sue you for every penny you've got.
We ask the question, is the claim that Dr. Edley misdiagnosed a hip fracture as bursitis a legitimate malpractice claim? Now, it turns out the guy claiming to have a hip fracture was engaging in extortion. But if the case had been authentic, let's see what he would have had to prove in court to get money out of Doc Edley. In medical malpractice cases, the plaintiff must prove 4 things. 1, that he was a patient of the doctor. 2, that the doctor was negligent. 3, that the negligence led to additional injury. And 4, the injury led to specific damages. Here's where it gets interesting. The standard for proving misdiagnosis is pretty tricky because doctors aren't expected to be perfect. They're just expected to be reasonably competent. A wrong diagnosis isn't automatically malpractice, so courts tend to look at 1, what diagnostic tests were available and appropriate? 2, did the doctor perform a proper examination? 3, were the symptoms consistent with multiple possible conditions? And 4, did the doctor maintain adequate medical records? The California Supreme Court, in fact, ruled in a case in 1951, quote, mere error of judgment in the absence of a want of reasonable care and skill in the application of his medical learning will not render a doctor responsible for untoward consequences in the treatment of his patient. Close quote. The more you know. Now, let's get to the plot of this episode. The case of the pathetic patient. Palmview Medical Center, where Wayne Edley is about to have his lunch, interrupted by a visitor with a grudge. Enter one Mr. Whitlock, hobbling in on crutches and carrying some very interesting x-rays.
What do you see?
Oh, it looks like there was once a small fracture there.
Well, now, that's just what the x-ray man in Beverly Hills said. And you know something, Doc? My hip was that way when I first came to you. I'd had a bad fall, and if you look at your records, you'll see I told you about it.
Miss York, would you please bring me Mr. Whitlock's record, please? Also, the x-ray we took on his first visit. Now, Mr. Whitlock, I think we're going to find that you did not have a fractured hip when you were my patient last year. I remember very well.
Wouldn't you know it? The x-rays that could prove Doc Edley's original diagnosis were lost in a convenient little fire.
You've forgotten about that fire last April.
Well, what's the fire got to do with it?
Over here. There weren't many x-rays, but the defective wiring did burn some of the ones between U and Z.
Between U and Z? Oh, it's right through W for Whitlock. Oh, swell.
Whitlock wants cash.
How much will you settle for?
$5,000?
5,000.
When Doc Edley shares his trouble with Janice, she suggests getting advice from local businessman Leslie Hall. Only problem for Doc, Hall happens to be Janice's ex. Doc Edley isn't exactly thrilled about her advice.
Hey, why don't you let somebody else handle this? A lawyer, maybe, or somebody who knows about business things.
Someone like who?
Oh, you're so quick-tempered.
Oh, no, someone like who? Leslie Hall?
Well, you can at least trust Leslie. And he does know about local things. Well, he'd realize what could happen to your new clinic if it...
Janice, the last thing in the world that I need is advice from your Hicktown boyfriend. Now, there are principles involved.
Oh, darling, I'm sorry. I was just trying to...
I know. But you let me do this my way.
So, Doc goes hunting for evidence to clear his name, specifically some notebooks from Janice's uncle, Dr. Gates, the guy who moved to Switzerland.
All I want from you is some information on those little black notebooks of Janice's uncle, Dr. Gates.
Oh, forget about those, Wayne. If I were you, I wouldn't even bother your insurance company. Look, why don't you just pay this character off and be done with it? If you're a little short, I'll even lend you the money.
Leslie, I just want to find the books. Now, where are they?
Well, as I remember, see, you're in Los Angeles now, right? Yes, well, I think they're out here at the old farmhouse. I'm sure that's where the box they're in is stored. Yes, up in the attic at the old Gates farmhouse.
Enter Perry Mason, who's about to discover that the case is less about medical malpractice and more about murder. Leslie Hall, he winds up dead in his apartment, and the scalpel found in Doc Edley's incinerator, eesh.
Doc thought maybe you could tell me, this is a scalpel, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
No, don't touch it, please.
Why not?
Well, for one thing, those flecks of blood there. Doc, do you have any idea why we'd find a perfectly good scalpel like this out in your incinerator? There was part of a bloody towel wrapped around it, if that helps any.
Look, I swear I don't know anything about it. I swear I didn't kill him. All right, I hated the man.
Just answer their questions as simply and as truthfully as you can, Doctor.
Yes, sir, but I'm afraid you better be doing it down at headquarters from now on. Mr. Mason, we like Doc Edley around here. And if you're thinking about helping him, I'd sure suggest you put on some speed.
Not looking great for our physician friend, but as the court case rolls on, Dr. Gates from Switzerland, turns out he never made it to the Alps. He's been taking a permanent dirt nap in his own laboratory's planter box.
The doc claims old man Gates had his bank send it to them from Switzerland. Well, the only trouble is, that's Gates. We confirmed the identification with a dental record. So you see, he never went traveling to Switzerland or anywhere else. Uncle's been dead and buried in that planter box the entire year.
While the prosecution tries to paint our doctor as a desperate man eliminating blackmail threats, Perry's got other ideas. Paul Drake discovers some interesting intel about twin payoffs to our friend Whitlock.
My Mr. Whitlock has $5,000.
He's what?
All kinds of twins, including twin payoffs the night of the murder.
Yes, all right. What if we did collect more than once? There's nothing any more illegal about two cash transactions.
There is if the money is gained by pretense or fraud, Mr. Whitlock.
Well, I deny it.
Mr. Whitlock, if you'd prefer to be questioned in jail, I can arrange it.
And it seems our pathetic patient was working a nice little scam. But he wasn't the killer. Would you believe it's Mrs. Osborne, a.k.a. Virginia Gregg, the kindly old housekeeper with the art hobby?
If any woman used the incinerator that night, it was the woman who was trying desperately to lay certain blame on Dr. Edley. The woman who had access to the Gates farmhouse, and who also set up false evidence there. The woman who must have killed Dr. Gates, and then having been blackmailed by one certain person for the past year, found she had to kill him too. The blackmailer, Leslie Hall. The woman?
Me!
Turns out she killed Dr. Gates when he was planning to leave without her. Leslie Hall figured out the murder and started bleeding her dry, using his power of attorney to keep up the illusion that Gates was still alive. When Hall got too greedy, well, Mrs. Osborne showed she wasn't just handy with a paintbrush. As for those Whitlock brothers, classic con men.
The only thing I don't understand is just how the Whitlocks planned to work this racket of theirs.
Easy. One of them had an old fracture, so the one without the fracture would fake some symptoms and get some treatments. If there was an x-ray, they'd steal it or destroy it. Later, the one with the fracture would go around and claim malpractice. They were getting ready to pull the same stunt on several doctors.
Enough about medical mishaps and murderous housekeepers. It's time to get trivial. Join us, won't you? Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A poll is a subject worth investigating more. Adela is a deep dive on an actor or actress who guest starred in the episode. And finally, a Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero. Our Paul prompt this episode: let's dig into the history of medical malpractice. The insurance requirements mentioned in the episode would have been pretty new.
Well, I haven't contacted my insurance company yet. I'm afraid of their reaction.
Were doctors required to carry it? What were the typical coverage amounts? And while you're looking, how did insurance companies handle those suspicious lost x-ray cases? You know, tiny fires that wiped out certain letters of the alphabet in the case files. Start digging, Pauls! Our Della for this episode focuses on Frank Cady, who pulls double duty as the Whitlock twins.
What did you find? Police record? Draft dodging? Baby killing?
Here's 10 about Frank. 1. Born Susanville, California, 1915, youngest of 3 children. Number 2. Studied journalism and drama at Stanford, where he worked on the campus humor magazine, The Stanford Chaparral. Number 3. Cady did an apprentice at London's Westminster Theatre, appearing in 4 plays and on the BBC in 1938. World War II comes calling. He serves in the Army Air Force, stationed in England, France, and Germany. Number 4. Also worked as an announcer and news broadcaster at various California radio stations. Number 5. Film career. He's the man on the fire escape in Rear Window. He appears in Billy Wilder's Ace in the Hole. He's in When Worlds Collide. He also has roles in The Bad Seed and Father of the Bride. Number 6. Played Doc Williams in Ozzie and Harriet for over a decade, and also popped up on Make Room for Daddy and Gunsmoke. Number 7. But it's as Sam Drucker that he made television history.
Oh, Mrs. Brown, I got a special on bacon today, 45 cents a pound. Miss Higbee, I got a big special on bacon, 35 cents a pound. Could I interest you in a pound of bacon, 15 cents, 10 cents, 5 cents? Free bacon. Free bacon. I'll take it.
Cady is the only actor to play the same recurring character on 3 shows, Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, and Petticoat Junction, simultaneously. He appeared on 142 episodes of Green Acres, 152 episodes of Petticoat Junction, and 10 episodes of Beverly Hillbillies. He was one of only 3 actors to stay with Petticoat Junction for its entire 7-year run. Number 8. Despite his fame as Sam Drucker, Cady remained pragmatic about typecasting. Told the Portland Oregonian, quote, "You get typecast. I'm remembered for those shows and not for some pretty good acting jobs I did other times. I suppose I ought to be grateful for that because otherwise I wouldn't be remembered at all. I've got to be one of the luckiest guys in the world." Close quote. Number 9. 1940, married Shirley Catherine Jones. They stayed married until Shirley's death. They had 2 children together, Catherine and Stephen. Number 10, Shirley passed in 2008. That's 68 years of marriage. Way to go, Frank! Frank followed in June of 2012 at age 96. He left behind 3 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. Our Perry this episode comes from something subtle but telling. Did you notice how late Perry was at his office when Paul Drake called?
Perry, what time do you get to work in the morning? I was just going to leave this message with your night service.
Now, Perry says he was just going to get his briefcase, but we see our man burning the midnight oil more often than not. He's probably poring over some law books long after everyone else has gone home. No David Gideon in this episode. Our theme for this episode is pretense.
There is if the money is gained by pretense or fraud, Mr. Woodlock.
Should be called the pretentious patient. Pretense, of course, is the act of presenting something false as true, making a show of something that isn't real. And boy, do we have layers of pretense in this one. Mr. Whitlock pretends to need crutches. Leslie Hall pretends Dr. Gates is alive. Mrs. Osborne pretends to be grateful for the annuity she's received. And the money pretends to come from Switzerland. The only one who never puts on an act? Perry. As usual, our man cuts through all pretensions to find the truth. And he doesn't need a scalpel. Now it's time for a Perry proverb. In this episode, we get a double dose of Perry wisdom. It's always great when Perry invokes the classics. Upon first meeting Doc Edley, Perry offers this gem about legal strategy.
There's a saying among lawyers, Dr. Edley, a saying almost as old as the common law. It goes like this: you can win, but lose while you're winning.
Sure, Doc Edley could have fought the malpractice claim and won, but at what cost? But Perry saves his best observation for last. In the denouement, talking about the con game, he observes,
A famous man once said, "The oldest and best known evil is even more supportable and tempting than one that's new and untried."
Yep, a typical medical fraud case churned into a meditation on human nature. And Paul concurs.
Figures. I always kind of like the old Temptations best.
Now, let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
There is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
Every time we visit the water cooler, we give you deleted scenes, 3 bits that didn't quite make the episode's final cut. We've got 3 for the pathetic patient. Number 1, after learning about medical records going up in flames, Paul Drake keeps suggesting increasingly elaborate fireproofing methods for Perry in asbestos file cabinets, not underwater storage. Got a nice cave system up in the Sierra Madres. Number 2, Doc Edley spends an entire afternoon teaching Griff Rowland how to correctly pronounce bursitis. Number 3, Doc Edley remains convinced there's more in that dirt than just bodies. Find that gold, Griff! In our Paul prompt from the last episode, The Case of the Meddling Medium, we asked you to investigate Dr. Puharich's real-life ESP testing procedures. My dad came through with some fascinating research. Quote, Dr. Puharich conducted structured experiments that often involve complex scientific setups, rigorous observation, and occasionally hypnosis. He employed scientific equipment to monitor brainwaves and physiological responses to psychic phenomena. He attempted to document psychic abilities objectively, and his tests were conducted under controlled conditions to rule out external influences. In contrast, the 3 tests featured in The Case of the Meddling Medium were campy, overly theatrical, and focused on creating suspense rather than replicating scientific methods. As an aside, my dad closes, Dr. Puharich's performance in the episode is wooden and stilted. Although ESP was not her specialty, Dr. Joyce Brothers would have been far more convincing based on her performance on the game show 21. Close quote. Now that's the kind of casting insight we love to see from our detectives. Thanks, Daddy-O. Now it's time for a listener letter. Aunt Myra writes in with 2 interesting observations about The Case of the Meddling Medium. Quote, I like what you called the harpsichord brigade. I wonder if the producers on the show had Puharich play himself because they half believed him. Close quote. She also shared that she's glad new listener Valerie found the podcast and that she's a fan of David Gideon. Who can blame her? As always, I'd love to hear from you. Do you have a comment on the episode or the pod in general? Drop me a line at theperrypod@gmail.com. Next time, grab your scuba gear and your smuggling maps because we're headed south of the border. When a kelp bed expedition turns deadly, Perry finds himself diving deep into a case involving canceled contracts, smuggled gold, and murder on the high seas. It's the case of the traveling treasure. Join us, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat!